Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. My name is Alan Stephen, and I'll be your host for today's webinar organised by the Society of Chemical Industries Science and Enterprise Group, and the event's entitled Growing Your Business in Japan. Whilst this is an SCI event, it's being hosted by LabLinks, and I'd like to extend a big thanks to the team at LabLinks for making this happen today. If you'd like to find out more about how LabLinks brings people together, please log on at lablinks.io after today's event. So today's event is about growing your business in Japan. Japan is one of the world's leading economies with an attractive living environment and a developed consumer base, but big firms often struggle to penetrate it and find it complex to do business with Japan. With that in mind, we wanted to put on an event to share learning and cross-cultural tips that could be of value, particularly to smaller firms. So our second speaker is Gerhard Fasol. Gerhard has a PhD in semiconductor physics and has been an entrepreneur in Tokyo since 1997. In his present role as CEO of Eurotechnology-Japan, he's helped develop hundreds of businesses. Gerhard, I'd like you to join me on stage.
Okay, shall we start? Perfect. So I'm very sorry for all these technical issues. So now it seems to be solved. This is just a short self-introduction. I've worked with Japan since 1984, so that's more than 30 years now. I came here first in 1984 to set up, that was just after my PhD at Cambridge University, to help set up research cooperation with NTT labs. And then in the summers between 84 and 90, I worked on research cooperations with Tokyo University as a faculty. I was faculty at Cambridge University Cavendish Lab and Trinity College at that time. And I moved to Japan. I was manager of the Hitachi Lab in Cambridge. And then I moved to Japan, was 5 years associate professor at Tokyo University, had a national research project on spin electronics, which would be it would be quantum computing today in this direction. And then in 97, I set up my company. And since 97, I've been working with hundreds companies, with Madonna and New York Police Department and Siemens and NTT Communications on Europe strategy, mainly M&A and cross-border business development. And also companies come to us if it doesn't work out in Japan. So I was 5 years, I was associate professor at Tokyo University Electric Engineering Department, which is the #1 elite university here in Japan. And then I was also board director of a Japanese stock market listed cybersecurity company. I was guest professor at Kyushu University, starting projects in Kyushu. And so I've been working with Japan in Tokyo now, in Japan now for, that's 1991, it's almost 30 years now. So if you go to the next slide, that three pictures which kind of give a bit of my background. There's Trinity College, where I was 13 years, first for my PhD, then as a faculty member, and I'm building up Trinity in Japan now as a kind of Japan organization and alumni organization of Trinity College, where I organize also Zoom discussions and that has already led to new cooperations between research leaders in Japan and Trinity fellows and students of Trinity. Then in the middle, there's a picture of myself in the lab in the Cavendish, and I had a similar lab, optics lab in Tokyo University as well. And on the right is a picture of my great-grandfather, Ludwig Boltzmann. And I'm, for 10 years now, I'm organizing Ludwig Boltzmann Forum here in Tokyo at the Austrian Embassy as a leadership forum, bringing it together like chairman of, vice chairman of JR East I had invited, or the sleep specialist, top sleep researcher of Japan. So I organized like a leadership community. So can you go to the next slide, please? So I thought I'll talk about 3 or 4 points today. One is why Japan? So why do you want to build a business in Japan? And uh, Japan is the third largest economy. So number one is US, number two China, number three Japan, number four is like Germany. Now, interestingly, for many US companies, which are important today, like software as a service or cloud-based companies, they do not do business in China. So for cloud-based and many other high-tech companies in US, the number one biggest foreign market for them, looking out from US, is Japan, number one. And that perspective is different in Europe, because for, like, let's say UK companies, usually the number one foreign market will be like Germany or like US, but or China, but people in UK wouldn't think about Japan as the number one priority and number one size foreign market. So that's perspective is different for European companies and US companies, which is quite noticeable here in Tokyo. So we've been working for a lot of US companies for which we are just in discussions again with a Silicon Valley cloud-based software as a service company, for which quite clearly Japan is the number one market outside US. Now, other factors why Japan is important is innovation. Many unique business models, technologies come from Japan, and there's a strong science technology base. It's also a democracy, and there's no internet censorship. There's no censorship of any kind in Japan. Of course, there are laws, but there's no censorship. All other countries here, like South Korea and Singapore, for example, do have internet censorship. Now, second point is how to build your business. Third, how to sell in Japan, and then how to get started. So, can you switch next slide, please? Okay, so with this view graph, I want to give you an idea about the size of Japan, because in my experience, many people in Europe, even leaders of big corporations, don't have a good experience about the size. They don't have a feeling for the size of Japan. So for this, I want to show you this view graph. I hope you can read it. Japan has islands, big islands. The biggest island is Honshu, and on Honshu there are different regions. The biggest region is Kanto. Kanto is the area around Tokyo. So Kanto has about 40 million people population, and some of the world's largest companies. There's government is here. And in terms of size, Kanto is about the same size as South Korea, or like Turkey, economically, or Italy. No? Then the second largest area of Japan is Kinki, or Kansai, which is the area around Osaka, Kyoto, Nara, Kobe. And traditionally, many pharma companies originate from Osaka area, and there are still many pharma companies are there. Electronics companies are there. In Kyoto, you have a very unique startup culture. You have ceramics companies are very strong. Kyocera is there, and the Nintendo is in Kyoto. So Kyoto has a very unique business culture, and it's also very large. So the Kansai area is economically as large as Philippines or South Africa, but the character is, of course, very different. You know, Osaka area has a lot of strong universities, like the Center for Regenerative Medicines and Cell Therapy is centered around Kyoto University. And also there's a Kobe, after the earthquake in the 90s, to revive the economy of Kobe, the Japanese government invested a lot of money to build a regenerative medicine focused biohub or bio ecosystem in Kobe, and also in Osaka and in Kyoto. And so there are several other regions. So for example, Singapore, if you think about Singapore, then Singapore economically is about the same size as Kyushu, which is the westernmost large island of Japan. So this is just to give you an idea about the size. So in Europe, many people, their mind share, when they think about Asia, then Singapore has a very large mind share. Of course, Singapore is a very important country, but in terms of comparing with Japan, then Japan is economically very much larger than Singapore. Economically, it compares to about size of Kyushu, or size of Kanagawa-ken, which is an area around south of Tokyo. Okay, so next view graph, please. Can you give? Okay. So when you think about building business in Japan, then at some point when you grow, you will need to think of Japan as a matrix. So you will need to think about Japan in terms of regions, which I just showed, introduced in the previous slide. And now in this slide, I'm going by industry sectors. So if you, many Silicon Valley software companies, for example, which do cloud-based business processes, they address all regions of Japan and all business sectors. So they will need to have within their company this matrix type approach for the business development in Japan. So developing for each sector in each area of Japan. So if you look at industry sectors, they are the government of Japan, of course, measures the size of the economy and has this classification of industry sectors. So you can classify the industry in different ways, but one way is to do it by the size of the industry sectors in terms of sales. Another one would be in terms of value add, which will give you a different ranking. But in terms of sales, the largest industry sector is retail. Then the second largest is manufacturing. So if you are chemical industry, if you are addressing chemical industry, or you're addressing pharmaceutical industry, then this will be within this manufacturing sector. Then you have construction. Medical is another area of interest, of course, for you, and transportation, communications, and so on. And in each of these sectors is the second or third largest globally. So, for example, even real estate, Japan's real estate industry is one of the, we're like second largest or third largest globally after US. Okay, so if you go to the next, now we are going to dig down in the industry sector. So we'll pick we'll pick 4 industry sectors which are of interest, I think, for the audience here today: manufacturing and information communications, professional, scientific, medical, healthcare, welfare. So just let's look at the lowest one here, medical, healthcare, welfare. The size of the medical welfare area is about, business area is about, in terms of business size, is about $700 billion. So if you compare that with NHS of England, or like Department of Health, Social Care of England, the size of that is about $200 billion. So you can see that the health and social care in England is about 200 billion. For Japan, it's about 700 billion. So you can see this size comparison. Another interesting factor I want to show here is the number of companies. So you can see, if you look at the manufacturing sector, you have 500,000 companies. Or like if you look at medical, healthcare, also you've got 500,000 companies. So the reason I show you that is that if you address, for example, pharmaceutical companies, and you want to partner or get investment from or sell to pharmaceutical companies, which would be here in manufacturing, then you are starting with 500,000 companies. So in order to find the ones which you really want to talk to, needs quite a lot of work, intensive systematic search work. And so that's what I want to show here. So next slide, please. Now we'll dig again one step deeper, which is the pharma industry. So if you just look at let's say you want to sell or partner or get investment from pharma industry, then Japan is the third largest pharma industry market. First one is US, second one is China, third one Japan, and then Germany, France, Italy, UK. So if you go to the next slide, please, we dig even more into the pharma market. Here I'm showing the top 14 pharma groups of Japan. So if you want to partner, sell, get as a customer, joint development, license your pharmaceutical developments, or sell your, chemical services to the pharma industry, then you have here the list of the 14 top pharma groups. These top pharma groups together have about $100 billion sales. The largest ones are Takeda with 30 billion sales, Chugai. Another one is, like Mitsubishi Tanabe, or like Sumitomo Pharma with $5 billion. Each one of those is a very substantial company with their own specialities, their own history, their own character. And then in addition to that, you have foreign companies, pharma companies active here, like Novartis, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, and so on. But then if you go to the next slide, so sorry, next slide. Okay, so in addition to these top 15 pharma groups, you have in our platform, in our database, and the companies we work with, some are customers, some we are in discussions with, there are another 100 pharmaceutical companies. And then in regenerative medicine, cell therapy sector, there are about 230 Japanese companies. So if you want to do business, like you want to sell, or you want to partner or get investment from, or sell a company to, or invest or acquire in the Japanese pharma sector, you have to deal with this 110 roughly pharmaceutical companies and systematically work out which ones are the ones which you want to work with. So one reason I tell you that is that I found that in cases where customers come to us, let's say a European pharma company will come to us and they've been already visiting Japan 3 times, then what I find is, for example, they will attend the Yokohama Biopharma Conference, for example. Then who they meet tends to be by accident, so they will meet, let's say, 20 people, but they are not systematically searched for out of these 100. They meet people who they happen to meet at this conference. So because all these 100 companies will not attend, for example, the big bio conference in Yokohama. Can you go to the next one? Okay, the structure of the Japanese pharma sector is quite a little bit different than in Europe. So in Japan, you have the traditional pharma companies, including these big 14 or 15, which I mentioned to you. Then in addition, you have a large number, quite a substantial number of new entrants. These are like brewery companies, electrical conglomerates, or rubber companies. For example, there's a company called JSR, Japanese Synthetic Rubber. They used to make synthetic rubber for car tires, which in the meantime, they have sold that division, and they have moved into pharmaceutical biospace. So you have non-traditional pharma companies entering the pharma space in Japan for diversifications or for pivots. A very successful such pivot is Fujifilm, which I'm sure you've heard about. Fujifilm is the Japanese equivalent of Kodak. It's used to be a photographic company which was started in Japan, as an answer to the US Kodak. And in the meantime, they have pivoted to very successfully pivoted to a number of new areas, including contract cell manufacturing. So today they are one of the biggest contract cell manufacturing companies, and they're very actively acquiring. So they have acquired companies recently in Denmark, in UK, in Germany, in US to build up their contract cell manufacturing. Then you have ventures, of course, and then you have very strong medical equipment industry in Japan. One of the examples, Olympus, but there are many, many more. Okay, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so another reason to do business in Japan is innovation. So I'm picking one example here, just very recently. Moderna, who you will know, it's a company called started maybe 10, 15 years ago in Boston, Massachusetts, and they are developing mRNA therapies, including, of course, this very famous vaccine, which I got injected with 5 times in Tokyo. And they entered the Japanese market very rapidly, of course, because there was a very urgent need for the vaccine and a market and a need and encouragement by the Japanese government to bring their mRNA COVID vaccine to Japan. So they didn't have the time to set up their own subsidiaries. So initially they brought the vaccine to market and into the arms of the population here via Takeda. So they had an arrangement with Takeda, one of the biggest pharma companies here. So when I received my vaccinations, it was always under the primarily under the name of Takeda. But about half a year ago, I think Moderna has started their own subsidiary. They're in the process now of transferring the permissions, the licensing and the registrations of their therapies or their vaccines. They're transferring that now from Takeda to Moderna. And very interestingly, Moderna has, for the first time ever, acquired a venture. And that was in Japan, in Tokyo. It's a venture called Okrisiro Genomics, which is a Tokyo-based venture with developing a certain class of tools for cell-free synthesis and production of plasmid DNA, which is a building block for mRNA manufacturing. So for $85 million. So the reason I'm telling you that is several reasons. One reason is that we have a lot of innovation in Japan, which is interesting for foreign companies. And so this shining example, it's not the only example, but it's one of the outstanding examples is the acquisition by Moderna of this company, Okrisiro Genomics, for $85 million. Now, so if you go to the next slide, please. Yes, I'm showing you here that this company, Okrisiro, is not the only venture company. So you can see the growth of venture investments in startups in Japan. So you can see there's really the starting up of investment in startups is a bit later than in Europe and much later than US, but it's now on a very rapidly increasing growth curve. The total investments in ventures is still quite a lot lower than in the UK or EU or US, but it's growing and it's going to continue to grow. What is also very interesting is you can see that about 1/3 of investments in Japanese startups in 2021, so 2 years ago, is by VCs, and 1/3, a full 1/3, is by foreign companies. So foreign companies are very interested and also welcome to invest in Japanese ventures. And there are many, many case stories, including the pharma and chemical space. So if you go to the next view graph, please. How to build your business in Japan. So I think it's better you have a long-term vision where you want to be in, let's say, 5 years or 10 years when you enter Japan. And the recommended long-term target in most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases, is to build up your own enterprise in Japan, to build up your own leadership team, to build up your own community of enthusiastic Japanese customers who you serve and who you listen to and learn from, and who you partner with, to build your own partnership network, who then serve customers for you, to build your own value in Japan, and to become a trusted member of the Japanese community in your field, and even better, become a leader in your field in Japan. So if you're a leader, for example, in UK, or you're a leader globally, or you're a leader in US in your field, then why not become a leader in Japan? So let's say Moderna, which I just mentioned, they are on the way to become a leader in the emerging field of mRNA therapy development, for example. They will speak at conferences here. They will be, valued members in this community. So if you do it the right way, you will not be seen as an outsider, but as an insider in Japan. Another shining example is Salesforce.com, for example. They are a shining, northern star in the SaaS community in Japan, and young students want to work there, and it will become top in the rankings of the most popular places to find jobs in, and so on. So that is really what I just outlined here is like one ideal development which you could aim for, and many companies do that and actually get there. But not every company gets to this kind of ideal situation. But I think that is a recommended long-term target. Not many companies manage it, and not for in every case it's the best way to do it, but in most cases it's like that. And then these very successful companies, they will do R&D in Japan. They will learn from Japan for other markets. They will do venture investments in Japan. And there are many examples of companies like this, including UK companies, which are doing that. AstraZeneca, for example, I think they're on the way to getting to this kind of ideal in-community situation. Okay, so this is like a long-term target. So I think if you have a long-term target, then you can kind of work backwards and decide, okay, what should be the first step, and why should I do the first step, and how much should I invest, or should I invest, So if you have a long-term vision in mind, then it will be easier for you to get started and take the right decisions along the way. Okay, so next step, please. Okay, yeah, okay, so how do you get to this long-term target? Of course, you have the constraints. So you have to be aware of your constraints. So building up your own company, hiring people, hiring a team, that costs investment, costs money. So some companies do have that money, but even then, it's a question of risk management. You have to see that you have to stage your investment, by step by step, to see that your first step is successful, and then do your second step, and then invest more, and so on. And if you look at successful entrants like Salesforce.com, for example, they have done that. They have invested enough at each stage, but they're investing step by step. No? If you don't have money to invest, then why don't you think the other way around and get investment from Japanese companies into your company? Japanese companies invest very much in Europe, in UK, in US, to acquire technology, to acquire know-how, or to get access to people. Or let's say in UK, they would for example, they would invest in companies in the Cambridge, Oxford, London area in order to access the communities there via the people employed by the companies they invest in. Okay. So next step is how to sell in Japan. If you go to the next slide. So let's say you have decided you don't want to set up a company yet, or you already have a company and now you want to sell. So then you have to see what is the value proposition for your product or your services in the eyes of your Japanese customer, and not in your eyes, but in the eyes of the Japanese customer. And quite surprisingly, surprisingly many European companies fail in Japan because the value proposition is not right. Typical examples are retailers. I know at least, I think, 5 European retail chains which failed in Japan. I won't name any names, but there's a big German one, a big French one, and a very big UK retail chain, which in their countries have very famous brands. But in Japan, the pitfall is that if nobody knows your brand in Japan, you don't have a brand in Japan. And if you are a retail chain, usually it's hard to see what kind of value you can bring into Japan, and then such companies will fail in Japan. And you need trust. Or another example is IKEA the first time. IKEA is very successful in Japan now, but it's the second entry. They failed on the first entry, then they made like 20-year break. And after 20 years later, they came again and learned from the first mistake. And now they are here again. And the most important thing is trust. You need to have trust in Japan. So you need to set up your company in the way and hire the people so that you can gain trust of your business partners, of the community, of your customers. You have to understand the competitive situation, and people are key. When you talk to people, for example, to sell, you have to know who you talk to. And that's in Japan. It's not, if you talk with a Japanese company, it's not that often for foreigners, not so easy to understand what actually the role of the person you talk to is inside his or her company. And because to do that, you really need to understand the inside of his or her company. And you also need to look at the Japanese side of the business card and understand what the Japanese title actually means. If you only look at the English side of the business card, often you can't really understand what that person is inside the company, even including the top people. And you have to do customer service to Japanese standards. We had a customer, a German middle-sized company, which was, have 500 years history in Germany. They sell high-precision parts to BMW, Volkswagen, Mercedes. They're highly respected in Germany, and they came to us and say, what are we doing wrong in Japan? And we found out, once we have been doing the due diligence, worked with them for a while and doing some research on what the Japanese, their customers are thinking about them and so on, we found out that they were on the blacklist of a number of Japanese blue chip manufacturers, which would have been the key customers for them. And they were on the blacklist because of unreliable customer service. So the levels of the response time, the quality, the perfection, usually is, the standards are much higher than in Europe, usually. So usually the response time to a customer service request at top companies in Japan is measured like in minutes or in hours, and not in days or weeks, as sometimes when people go on long holidays in Europe, for example. So you have to think about that when you interact with Japanese companies. If you want to sell to Japanese companies, you have to be extremely responsive, and you have to fulfill their expectations and not yours if you want to sell. Okay, next view graph, please. This is an actual project which we were doing. On the left-hand side, you see it's a European family-owned, about $2 billion industrial company, which was our customer. And on the right-hand side, you see the outline structure of a Japanese company. That's a company listed on the stock exchange, also about $2 billion sales. So this a $2 billion European company came to us. Their corporate strategy office came to us, and they said for the last 5 years they have been thinking of acquiring one of the business divisions of this a large Japanese corporation, and they never succeeded to start a conversation about this potential acquisition, and they asked our help. So they signed a contract with us, and started working with us. So the first thing we did is we analyzed the Japanese company, understand the history, the background. They went through restructuring. We found out, we looked at who is the top management, how is the management organized, and who should we talk to. So in one of the previous slides, I told you it's very important to find out who you talk to in a company. If you want to do M&A, you want to sell, then you have to, one of the most important issues is to find out who to talk to in the company. And based on the analysis, I decided I want to talk to the person who is, if you can read Japanese, it says here Daihyo Torishimari Yaku Fukushacho. So this means every Chinese character here, every Japanese character here has a meaning, a legal meaning, and also a meaning of the job of that person in the company. Daihyo means representative. That means that he can take decisions on behalf of the company. Torishimariaku means board of directors, and Fukushacho means vice president. So we had a first meeting. It was myself, just one-on-one, plus one person from the corporate strategy office. So we had 3 of us a meeting. And then about 3 months later, we had a meeting between the division managing director from Europe, myself, the person from the representative from Hong Kong of the European company, plus people from corporate strategy office, department heads. So we were like about 6-7 people in the room. Interestingly, at that point, this board of director vice president was not in the room, but so then, because of the preparation, we could achieve a positive response within 12 hours. The Japanese company, within 12 hours, gave an initial yes to the proposal from the European side. So I'm just showing here 3 case studies of companies which went wrong. One is Vodafone, which essentially the 2 reasons why Vodafone failed in Japan is they didn't invest enough money in Japan, and secondly is they didn't HR issues. They didn't have the right managers in Japan. The second one is Nasdaq and London Stock Exchange AIM, both failed, and then Volkswagen with Suzuki as well. So in the last slide, if you go to the next slide, please, the last one, is a summary, which is essentially a list of questions to you. So what do you want to achieve in the long term in Japan and why? Then how much are you ready to invest, or are you looking for investment? Because to build business in Japan, somebody will have to invest. So that has to be either you from your balance sheet or from your investors or your banks, or it has to be investment from Japan, which you're looking to attract into your company. Then what is your value proposition in Japan? What is your competition? Who should you be talking with, and pick the right people to talk with? And then don't learn from your own mistakes, but learn from previous already done mistakes of others. Okay, thank you.